Muted.
On the topic of 8 IAG best practices to avoid hefty penalty. This is an interesting topic that we're going to present today. As you all know, IAG is Identity and Access Governance, and we're going to discuss 8 of the best practices of IAG, which we kind of experience in our implementations with customers, and we're presenting it here in this 1-hour webinar, so so everybody can get benefited. Basically, before we jump into the process of IAG, I just want to give a brief overview about identity and access management itself, because as you all know, IAG is one branch of IAM, which is a broader umbrella of services, and IAG is basically one of the branches that got activated recently because of a lot of compliance issues coming up in organization role structures and entitlements, right? So what is IAM? Just briefly, I will classify IAM into 3 major modules. One is access management part, and second is the identity management part, and third is the governance part, right? So those are the 3 major pillars, if I can say that, of IAM. So how does all this fit in the big scheme of things? So for the access part is where identities and users and employees and non-employees from organizations would get access to the applications of a particular organization or a third party or even a completely foreign organizations, right? So that is where the access management part comes in. So the key elements of the access are authentication and authorization. Authentication is basically telling a system that who you are with the credentials you have. Basically, the credential combinations could be a combination of what you have and what you know and what you are. So that is the best form of credential you can give to a system to identify yourself as a user. So that is authentication. And authorization. So what is authorization? Authorization is basically a list of entitlements that a particular application would basically support. So for example, let us say there's an application which supports read-only access for a particular set of users who are just casual users, right? So that read-only part of entitlement could be rolled into a particular role, and that role can be given access depending on if the user is part of a particular group and who can access that role. So basically that part of rolling over a particular entitlement is authorization. So these 2 important pieces form the access management part of IAM, the first part. The second part is the identity management part. So the identity management part, which I've listed here, is the user role resource management / governance. The reason I listed governance also here is as we see a lot of organizations, the distance between governance and the management of identities is shrinking because the organizations are basically wanting to fast forward the governance part or streamroll the governance part into the identity management part. So there's a seamless update of entitlements and attributes and roles and resources as and when there is a change happens to the identity status, right? So that is where that's what we are seeing, and that makes the governance part even more critical. So so what is identity management, right? So identity management is basically a part where the identities that come into an organization in the form of users, employees, contractors, so they would go through any number of life cycle events within the organization over a period of time or forever, right? So tracking them on a daily basis, storing them into activities, events, and triggering automatic events depending on certain tasks that the identities go through every day, or certain functions that identities are basically interested in every day, is basically identity management. So it could be a combination of automatic processes. So the identity life cycle is managed through the identity management processes. It's a combination of approvals, it's a combination of events, it's a combination of a lot of different things that make the identity management part very critical to an organization. And why would identity and access management gain such an importance in this particular phase of the IT career, IT world? Because there are so many endpoints that are basically attracting attention within an organization that users would want to have access to. And these endpoints, they vary in nature. For example, it could be as easy as an LDAP or an Active Directory or SQL databases to very complex applications where you need to have some connectors to be done from any of these identity access management vendors. So that makes it much more complicated to connect to these endpoints and track or get your identities provisioned in those endpoints as and when the users who hold those identities are using those endpoints, right? So that is where the complexity increases. So the endpoints have become a critical piece. I would say, without the endpoints, there's not much happening in identities, because that's where access and identities merge, and endpoints become a critical piece there. So the governance part is also mixed up here. So I will show why that is important. That has to be part of the identity management itself, the second piece, in our next few slides. So this is basically the three parts that I just discussed about. The identity access management part is the first one. The second part is the entry to exit activity of an employee to the identity lifecycle management, and the third is the compliance management part. That makes it much more complicated because of the endpoints that are there in the organizations. So those are the three activities, three branches of identity management. So without much ado, I'll go to the actual topic, which is the identity and access governance. Okay, before that, what I'll do is I'll just briefly go through a slide here which talks about some of the key functional components of the identity and access management area. So before we go into IAG, this is the last slide where we talk about access management, policy management, authorization, entitlements, and authentication. These four functional components form part of the access management piece. Workflow automation, directory services, and provisioning form part of the identity management branch, and attestation, auditing, and reporting form part of the compliance management part. So these are the functional aspects. Just to throw some light on each of these. Access management, like we talked about, it's basically granting access to users for applications, and it is basically the grant is happening because of some policies that are enforced at some policy enforcement points and policy decision points, basically enable the enforcement. And fine-grained authorization entitlements, we briefly touched about that, which are governed by groups and roles for well-defined systems. And then the authentication methods, which could vary from single-factor, multi-factor to strong authentication to biometric to so it's expanding. That particular realm is expanding. Then the second piece, the workflow automation part, is a critical piece of the lifecycle management of identity management piece itself. The directory services is basically where your the workflow activities, the events, the tasks, sometimes the identities themselves, and the status of these identities are stored. And the provision, basically, when endpoints need to be accessed by these users who hold these identities, those endpoints need provisioning attributes from these parent systems, so that they can be assured that they're giving the right access to the right person into these endpoints. Similarly, when the users go out of purview of these endpoints, deprovisioning should also happen of those endpoints. So these three pieces, a piece of functional components, form the core of the identity management piece. So the third part is the attestation, auditing, and reporting. Attestation is a process by which the employees, their permissions, their entitlements, and the ownership of applications are basically attested or certified by either managers of those employees or application owners of the organization, or both, in most cases, both are involved in as multiple reviewers for the attestation piece. So it is basically saying, the manager is saying that, I am attesting or I am certifying this user to be, who is an employee of mine, to have access to this particular application at this level of entitlement. So that is what is an attestation is from a manager point of view. So that particular piece is what we're going to throw a light on in this particular conference. So webinar, sorry. So basically, we jump into the identity and access governance part, the third arm of the IAM, which is the topic of this webinar. So what is governance? Governance basically is a process of the decision making for an organization about the roles and entitlements that are there at the current state and current level at that particular point of time. So basically, if an organization wants to make some decisions about what the users are accessing at that point of time, under what roles and what level of permissions, and whether these levels are up to the industry standard, and whether there's any malpractices that are happening. Some roles are not being used at all. Some of the roles are overloaded, and some entitlements are never being used, but some entitlements are used very often and maybe even abused. So how does the organization know about it, and how do they correct it? In a periodic way, like in a quarterly way, right? So that the right kind of control is happening at the access level, right? So this is what a governance is. So it gives the organization a capacity to monitor the access part of their applications, and then to make some decisions based on the certification, and then implement it, and then make it in a quarterly manner. So a successive group of such campaigns or quarterly attempts would make the role structure and the access structure and the entitlement scene very robust and efficient for that particular organization. This also helps in compliance, like for example the SOX compliant. Many auditors look for these, especially when companies go for the annual, the quarterly financial statements. These parts are also audited by auditors, so that there is no ambiguity in access points of the particular organization. So where does the penalties come in here? Because that's the part of the topic here. The penalty comes in where, let's say, if there is a wrong access, that's being given to an employee who is not even there in the company yet. He has been terminated, let's say, last month, but he still has access and nobody has terminated it, right? So that's a big no-no for any organization. So that could result in hefty cost to the company in terms of damage to systems, or it could be somebody looking at some personal records of some users which they were not supposed to, and transferring it to some other organization, competition. So lots of penalties, not only in way of dollars. It could be in way of leaked records, identity being stolen. So there's a lot of issues that come up there. So as we grow in the number of endpoints and number of accesses and entitlements, this is becoming a complex problem. That's what we're going to address today. So what are the key features and components of access governance? And these are the 8 best practices that we are going to discuss here. These 8 points, right? So why we call these best practices? In our experience, we found that if an organization implements these 8 items in a thorough procedural way for every quarter, we have found out that lots of the problems that they had before they started implementing it just goes away, and it gives them a very standard look for the role structure and also the entitlement structure. So this is what that's why we are publishing these as 8 different items. There are several items in the governance piece which we are not referring here. These 8 are just highlighted because these are key components and key best practices. So the first is the certification part. Certification is also referred to as certification campaign. Like I just talked about, it is just a quarterly attempt to make sure that your roles are streamlined and aligned. And then comes the workflow management. What's a workflow management? Like everybody knows what a workflow is, but how do you manage the workflows? Is, let's say if a particular group of managers, or a new set of managers were acquired from a different merger, right? So the workflow needs to be automatically changed to accommodate this particular new set of applications that are coming in with new set of managers, so that the decision points are done correctly. So why would you even need a workflow, right? Basically, the workflow enables the certification to be done, or the routing of the certification to be done to the appropriate managers within the organization. So if there's a change in leadership or there's change in some organization structure, the workflow needs to be changed. But it can be adapted in such a way that it can be written in a generic way, so by using some attributes, so that the change can be minimal. So the workflow management forms a critical piece of that aids the certification process, and it also aids the access request management, which we're going to talk about later. So then comes the segregation of duties. So what is segregation of duties? Let's say if two people a person in the organization has two different roles which are contradictory. So let's talk about that when we go to that particular site. So to avoid that, what are the steps that an organization can take is basically coming under segregation of duties. And how do we identify that and make sure that that doesn't happen is one of the best practices that we can adapt. We'll discuss about that in that particular segment. Then comes the role management. The role management piece is a critical piece where even before a manager certifies for a permission, right? We basically do something called a role analysis to make sure that we identify redundant roles, efficient roles, roles that are abused, roles that are never being used, roles that users shy away from. Those things are analyzed and then put forth as a summary for the management to take appropriate actions. So we'll again revisit that. Access request management. Okay, the next two items that I'm going to talk about is a very reactive pieces. These two are reactive components or best practices of governance. When I say reactive, this means that basically when a certification happens, let's say when a manager certifies for a particular permission for a particular user, let's say he wants to revoke a permission, right, and reject a permission that the user has because of some reason, right, because he might have been transferred to another department, he just works part-time. So what happens is that effect should be immediately reflected in the system, right? So that is called reactive. So immediately what happens is an access request is sent to that particular application owner where that user was revoked, and immediately the revoke is basically established and made sure that the user does not have any more than the required access at that point of time as mandated by that particular manager's certification, right? So that is reactive management that we see a lot of it happening in the organizations today. And similarly, provisioning or change fulfillment is again a reactive attribute best practice. This is again same thing as request management, but it applies to endpoints. So when some endpoint entitlement is revoked by a manager for a particular user, immediately the same is reflected in that particular endpoint directly through an automatic process, which is a combination of workflow triggered by this particular certification itself that is done by the manager, or revocation done by the manager. So it's a combination of governance plus identity management happening at the same time. So this is a reactive process to some change in certification. Then comes the audit reports and recertification. These are reports that the auditors would go through to see if there's any change in the efficiency of the roles, efficiency of entitlements, any users, duplications have been addressed, orphan records, so many things that the audit reports can tell the organization and the auditors to show that this quarterly improvement has been made in the role decision process. Recertification is again an important reactive piece where when something happens and let's say there's a dynamic organization where things are happening on a daily basis, like roles get changed, entitlements get changed on a daily basis, and lots of employees come in and out, and there's a lot of employee churning happening. So in those cases, recertification becomes a critical piece. Certification, as you know, is just approving or rejecting permissions and entitlements. Recertification is a process when this happens on a daily basis and immediately to affect these applications, because the organization is always on the move. So that is ensured by recertification, where automatic, immediate updates happen to the systems, not only to the systems, to the certification process itself. So that's a critical dynamic feature that we are seeing in organizations. So we go to these 8 are depicted in this order here. This is basically a picture that says about these 8 different practices we just saw. Okay, so I'll briefly touch these 8 parts because in the following ensuing sections, Ram is going to present a case study for this. So role management, as I briefly touched, is beginning a complicated process because roles are all over applications. So people are finding it difficult to control them and organize them, right? So there are tools available in the market, different vendor products, where there's a bottom-up, top-down hybrid role analysis, and some products even come with activity-based role analysis, role definitions. They classify roles into business roles and IT roles. Basically, IT roles are roles that people have in different applications, and business roles are people having these roles in organizations and they don't have anything to do with IT. Sometimes the business roles dictate the IT roles themselves. So the classification of roles before the certification process itself is a very important factor in arriving at an efficient campaign or efficient role model even before the campaign starts. So this is a process even before the certification campaign starts. So that is role management. So what is certification itself? So this is after the role management is done, the second best practice that can basically happen in the governance process is certification. Certification is a process by which, like I said briefly, any particular employee status or a status of an entitlement or a status of an entitlement that is attached to an employee, or a status of a sensitive entitlement or a sensitive permission, is basically attested by the concerned authority. So there is there's a lot of tools in the market right now which do this. Some do it very efficiently, some do it in a primitive way, but the end goal is the same. The end goal is to identify those employees, those permissions, those entitlements, those users who have those entitlements, to find out whether they have it in the legitimate way, whether they still have to have it. If they don't have it, what happens, and who are the authorities to attest for it? So those are taken into considerations in these campaigns. Sometimes we also have to make some results from one of these campaigns, certification campaigns, to go into the next campaign, and that makes it even more complicated. For example, let's say the first campaign that we do in an organization is a manager attesting whether the employee is still employed in the organization under him or not. So that is an employee campaign, right? Manager-employee campaign. So let's say if the employee was terminated last month, but he still has some permissions in certain systems, that comes under decisions that needs to be imported into the next campaign, which is the permission campaign, where the permissions held by the employee, by the terminated employee, has to be vouched for by the manager. So even before that particular thing happens, the termination takes precedence, and those employees' permissions need to be removed from the system even before the manager permission campaign comes underway. So as you see, you can always see this best practice is in the constant process of cleansing orphan records, unattached permissions, terminated users' permissions. Those things are cleansed as and when the campaigns go from one step to another step. So these are some important steps to make sure your process is streamlined. And there's a lot of other issues that can crop up here. For example, the data modeling, right? So which particular campaign you are doing and what is the goal of that campaign will determine which data model that you are going to put into these tools for the managers to attest. So sometimes you attest just the permission, Sometimes you make the manager attest the permissions along with the attributes associated with the permission. Basically, giving the manager an option or a chance to say, okay, I attest for this permission for this user, but I don't agree with his location because he has been transferred. But he still should have this access. Things like that. So not only the permission is attested here, but any other attribute that is associated with the permission is also given a chance to be attested by the manager. So with this, we go to the third best practice, which is workflow management. Like we briefly touched upon, workflow is a process where decisions are made by business logic and rules, and they can be pre-programmed into the system. So basically, they are used for routing the approvals and the certification records to the respective managers and data owners. So the workflow form a critical piece of the best practices here. Any tool that is in the market today should support this workflow piece for the entire governance process to be successful. So it also takes care of escalations, multiple reviewers, enforcement of events based on some decision attributes at critical nodes. So this is again an important piece where decisions have to be made as to which particular reviewer has to review this particular user's record, because the user might have been transferred from one department to another. He might have escalated. He might have been promoted to a completely a different department. He might have become a contractor. So decisions have to be made either with a manual intervention or through automatic processes. So the workflows become a critical piece to make sure automatic governance is enabled. Then we go to the fourth item, which is segregation of duties. Like I talked about, this is nothing but to make sure that there's no extreme advantages to people who wants to take care of, who wants to gain from the positions. For example, I've given an example here. Let's say one person is preparing invoices, for a particular organization, and if the same person is a fund collector or a fund distributor, then there is a chance, that you're giving that particular person to bump up the invoice dollars or to slow down the purchases. So he should not be doing conflicting items and conflicting functions in that particular organization, so that to jeopardize the entire process, right? So how do we recognize that, these anomalies, right? So what we do is we do something called an SOD analysis, wherein which we go through entire the role structure of the organization to make sure no such anomalies exist. We ask questions within the organization to say what pair or what 3 or 4 roles that cannot be held together by an employee. It could be across departments, it could be across even strategic geographical locations, right? So we do those analysis and form rules and input into the system. So this could be validated at runtime, and managers will be given a chance to say, okay, this particular SOD violation, what we call a violation is if some employee is holding these 3 or 4 accesses which are contradictory, right? So the manager will get a chance to get flagged for this, and then he can say, yes, this employee should not be having these, right? So he can reject any of those access permissions. So this is a very important part of any organization's fraud management process. And what are the advantages of these? Company will be able to safeguard their data, obviously, because no data can be exported out of this. If the data compromising roles are given to some people who should not be having that, especially complementary roles, reduces the cost of compliance, obviously, because auditors basically love this kind of compliances, SODs, and reduces the risk of non-compliance, because by eliminating chances of people misusing these roles, you are basically eliminating the risk of non-compliance, or reducing the risk at least. So with that, we go to the fifth item, which is access request management. This is again, like I said, it's a reactive piece where even as of 2-3 years back, this was not part of governance, but most of these products are now addressing this as part of the governance itself, where depending on role changes, entitlement changes that happen to employees, immediately request workflows to access a particular system or get revoked from a system gets triggered and sent to the appropriate authorities immediately as and when the certification process is even done, right? So this is a very critical piece in the future, because organizations look for adaptive and reactive and immediate solutions for changes to role revokes and role reversals, right? So this is this particular part of it enables that. And what is the biggest gain of this? What happens is the policies and the practices that trigger this, it has to be so perfect, for this to happen, because you are looking at immediate reversals. And how does even a manager know how to recommend an employee, how to revoke access to an employee, and how the access request management process can be streamlined? Is basically through a tool. Actually, lots of vendor products have this tool where managers are given some clues as to what requests a particular employee should be having at a particular point of time, or is lacking at a particular point of time. For example, employee A, who has been in his organization for 6 years, sometimes what happens is he might not have a particular access to a key application which has been overlooked because of an oversight. But this particular tool can find it out and tell the manager that, hey, this guy is lacking that, and immediately that can be approved, and also an automatic trigger can go for that request. So this is a critical piece of governance, and it's a good best practice. We go to the other part, the provisioning part, which is an extension of the previous one, where after the request gets triggered as a reactive process, provisioning happens in those endpoints, because certain users have to have these permissions, right? So this can also affect not only provisioning, it can also do the deprovisioning part. So provisioning and deprovisioning fulfillment is an important key piece as part of this, one of the best practices that is slowly getting credence in this particular sphere. And audit reports is again, like I said, there's a lot of gaps that can be identified by these out-of-the-box or custom reports that are thrown out by these vendor products. And these reports do detail the efficiency of the system, and it helps in the process of entitlement management, access acquisition, stacking, and reporting, and which help in the compliance management process. So it's a key best practice. And the way the reports are done, it basically helps the process of compliance. The last part is the recertification piece. Like I said, recertification is something similar to an adaptive or a reactive kind of compliance process, where immediate changes are made, avoiding risks and losses to the organization, especially changes in organizations that are undergoing change every day, like hospitals, like healthcare units, right? So they might be having nurses rotating shifts, and this has to be reflected every day, especially in critical cares, right? So what happens is daily updates to the role structure happens through Delta campaigns, and daily the managers and data owners should be attesting for these roles on a daily basis, and immediate changes to applications should happen on a continual certification process. So this is a very critical, important piece for certain organizations, and it's slowly catching up with other organizations to make sure everything is in sync as and when the certification process is happening. So with this, actually, I transfer over to my colleague Ram, who's going to talk about an important case study where they're following these 8 best practices. A lot of improvement was made in a particular compliance structure of a particular real estate organization. Ram, please go ahead.
Introduce myself as Ram. So here I'll be presenting a case study of how 8K Miles has resolved a huge number of requirement process for a real estate company across US, and in US, I'm sorry. So our customer is basically from a real estate industry, and they were using a, let me read out the entire slide to understand what the case study is all about. So our customer was using an in-house application to attest and certify the users. They were using a legacy applications, and their legacy applications had very limited options to perform certification of campaigns, and they had various fluctuations of reports, and they were not able to manage the users and roles. 8K Miles have identified pain points to understand what the requirement is all about from their legacy applications, and they were unable to identify, the customers were unable to identify users who currently have permission to a particular resource, and they were unable to make recertifications of entitlements when users' status changed, meaning once when a user changes from one department to another, they were not able to do a recertification process, and they were unable to reassign or redirect to an appropriate reviewer based on policy or business logics, and they were unable to generate proper reports. They were unable to provision or deprovision based on dynamic entitlement changes, and they were unable to segregate users who were using conflicting entitlements so as to prevent data leakage or penalties. Overall, our customer was in a catastrophic state during their annual audit actually. And 8K Miles, we pitched in and helped in resolving all their issues with our solutions within 6 weeks of time. All right, so let me go to the next slide. So this is the first business case that we have identified. This is one of the business cases that we have identified in their system, and this is the assets flow. Consider that Jason, Jack, and John, they were in one department with a job title, tenant consultant, and they have access to tenant database. Now, Jack and John, these two people have shifted to a different department with a different job title called as maintenance support specialist. Till now they were having access to tenant database, and still after they moved to a different department, still they were having the same access to the same database. Ideally, this should not happen. This is the next slide. This is the actual process that has to be happened in their legacy system, but still they were able to access the tenant database. The main reason why we highlight this process is, as of now, they were tenant database, tenant consultant. Now they moved on to a maintenance support specialist, meaning they were supposed to own the owner's database. What happens if they have all the information of tenant database and they would have breached and they would have published all those information to the owners? Thereby, there becomes a conflict. Because each and every person name or the customer's name is very important, and if that is breached, any person might sue the company. So that's one of the biggest penalty a company can face it actually. So we have identified this issue. Again, the second business case. Now, Mingma is an employee who is actually reporting to Adam, and she has access to customer property database, and her job title is property preservation specialist. Now, Mingma jumps to a different organization with a promotion with her current designation as claims specialist. Now, Adam, he by mistake does he addressed Mingma's current access to this database, and he transfers this information to the HR. He does not the current application does not have any access for reassigning information or reviewers. It directly the manager was only having an option to only transfer this information to the HR portal, not to the actual reviewer. So here I read it out for you. When Mingma changes the job from one department to another, the manager one, that is the Adam, by mistake approves the customer property database and escalates the issue to the HR system. Now the HR system takes about 2 to 3 days time to find who Mingma's presently reports to, due to a heavy traffic of workflow process in their legacy application. Since there was a huge number of traffics because most of the data should be captured from different applications, so it took about 2 to 3 days time. Now the HR identifies who Mingma is actually reporting to, and he is able to only see the current database to which she have to own it actually. So Albert does not know what is the history of Mingma, and he only approves the current information. As of now, she has to log in actually. Again, today Mingma still have Mingma can still log into the customer property database, which is ideally wrong. In the second application, in the second slide, I'm going to show the solution that we have provided to our client actually. So here again, Mingma, she is reporting to Adam, but this time when Adam actually by mistakenly is approving Mingma's application, again he has an option to directly reassign the information to the manager Albert to Albert. Now Albert can able to see the history of what Mingma's applications are, and he can reject the application and he can approve the new database. Thereby, we made sure that the workflow process are very easy. We made the workflow process at a very easy point of time, and we have even found a lot of sort violations, and we have rectified all those informations. The solution that we provided from 8K miles to our customers are, we help them identify which user currently have permission to what resource by directly connecting to their Active Directory, helped users to perform recertification after a change in role entitlement, helped our customers to reassign or redirect to an appropriate reviewers based on policy or business logic, and helped in improve workflow management by setting up proper policies, incorporated sort rules, and generate accurate reports based on business requirement. So these are the solutions that we have provided within 6 weeks of time. And let me show you the screenshots of how the manager actually approves or attests a particular employee's information. So this is the login screen in which the user logs in as a manager with his username and password. And once when he logs in, he sees the number of certifications he needs to perform. Certifications are are built in based on campaigns. So there are about 2 campaigns here. One is manager user campaign and application permission campaign. So now the manager gets an option to certify both these campaigns. So what is manager user campaign is where the manager attests an employee stating that he is working under his leadership. And this is one. The second is application permission campaign, where the manager provides a permission to make sure that this particular employee can be authorized to access this particular resource. So these are the 2 campaigns. Now the third part is the manager clicks on a particular campaign and sees who is working under him actually. So in this case, the manager sees Angel as a person and Sheila as a person working under his leadership. Now, when the manager thinks that this particular person does not belongs to under his department, he can either do a reassign directly, as I told you in the screen. I have showed you in shown in the screen in the use case diagram. He can directly either click on the reassign part, or he can do a consultation. So once when he clicks on a reassign option, it redirects the manager to select a couple of names. If the manager knows who the particular user is belonging to as of now or reporting to, he can choose the particular name, and he can click on verify and submit. By doing so, he finishes off the manager employee campaign actually. But the second part is the manager permission campaign, where the manager knows exactly what kind of access his user needs to be provided. So he clicks again on the notification to see if he requests to do a particular permission campaign here. So now, as of now, the manager chooses a particular employee and selects which resource the particular user needs to be provided access. So he clicks on approve. So once when he clicks on approve, the report shows about the particular resource can have about 5 resources in its place actually. By doing so, the campaign gets over. Now, to see the reports, the manager can go to the reports and he can choose 3 different types of reports, where he can simply view the report, or he can do, he can also manage the reports, or he can also see the past information about a particular person actually through Arcade data. And doing so, he can also export the particular report in an Excel format. And this is a sample report that a manager can view here. And he can export this particular reports either in Excel or PDF format or Word format. So this is a very simple, easy way in which a user can use to do attestation on a particular user. So we have provided this step, these kind of steps, to resolve our customers' pain points. So do you have any questions?
What is the frequency of the campaigns that is advised, and what are the different types of campaigns? So basically, it's a very good question. The frequency of campaigns that is advised is like every quarter, because what happens is in our experience we see that every quarter the churn of events, even for an industry, for example, in this case the real estate firm that Ram had given as an example, they were having lots of churnings of employees and contractors using different sets of applications, changing every, in the middle of every quarter. So every quarter we were seeing lots of new permission records getting added to the system. So the data model was changing drastically. So we felt that every quarter is a good period, to have this campaign repeated. That way, they can have everything in place for the year, at the end of the year campaign, right? So that is one thing. What are the different types of campaigns? Actually, we normally have gone through 3 different types of campaigns. One is the manager-employee campaign that Ram just talked about, which is where the manager attests for the status of the employee. For example, whether the employee is within his purview or not, or he has changed the department, or he's been terminated. So that is being addressed by the manager-employee campaign. The decision of that campaign feeds into something for the next campaign, which is called the manager permissions campaign. Manager permissions campaign is something where the manager says, okay, these employees who are under my purview should have access to these particular entitlements, systems, and permissions, and they should not be having access to these. So that is an important piece of attestation that every organization should go through. And then there's a third one, which some organizations do at the very beginning, even before the manager-employee campaign, which is called the data owner campaign, in which some of the important permissions will be attested by owners of applications, or what we call them as data owners. For example, let's say there are applications like SAP, Oracle's, HR applications, ERP applications within an organization. Those owners of those applications will say, okay, these are the sets of entitlements my application should have for this quarter or from here on. So if somebody was already having an entitlement which is not part of this, they should be relooked, to see whether they still need to hold those permissions, right? So that needs to be cascaded into the manager permission campaign. So these campaigns are interrelated, but it is better to have 3 campaigns to make sure all the entitlement process is streamlined.
Thanks, Raj. There is one other question. What are the popular tools that are available in the market to do IAG, Identity Access Governance?
Okay, that's a good question. Actually, what we are seeing is there are lots of tools available in the market, but from popular vendor products like CA, IBM, Oracle, we also have our 8K-Mile service, which we have used in the case study that we just talked about. So some of these tools have functionalities that are almost on par, but some of them are a little bit ahead. Almost all popular vendor products like SailPoint, Oracle, IBM, CA, there are some open source tools too. With 8K-Mile's solution, all of them can address any identity access governance issue for any type of mid or small or higher scale organizations. Some of the names of these products: IBM has Cross Ideas, CA has a product called Governance Minder, 8K-Mile's product is called Governance Solution, Identity Access Governance Solution. So they have their own names, but they pretty much do everything on similar fashion.
There is one other question. In a typical healthcare environment, can we set up temporary users, like patients, contractors, as part of the IAM or IAG process?
Yes, definitely. That's another good question, because as I talked about, in a dynamically changing environment, you need to accommodate temporary workers or temporary employees, or some say contractors or consultants, or employees who are employed only for a brief period, right, say a couple of months, a year, right? So how would you accommodate them, right? So if you work from a governance standpoint, okay, so first, normally organizations, what they do is they have groups. They have groups in Active Directory where they have groups for employees, groups for these temporary employees, right? And and one of the most important aspects of the temporary employees is the termination date, right? Or a policy which says that what is the termination date of an employee, and at what point of time the termination gets effective, and is there any rule that makes the employee come back as again a contractor or a new regular employee. We can write some policies based on that. So it gets a chance for the employee to become permanent, or if they want to go on a vacation and come back, or do another job and come back. So we should have provisions for all that in our policies. So that's the policy-driven workflows will make sure that these termination dates are honored, and post-termination events or activities are followed as per what the organization rules are. So yes, temporary employees in fact can be accommodated. From a governance standpoint also, this becomes critical, because what happens is, if there are temporary employees, you need to be attesting those records pretty often, maybe even once a month, right? Because if you're going to have employees who are changing every month using your critical applications, you need to be attesting them on a monthly basis. So those groups can be, those special groups or sensitive groups can be singled out for attesting on a very brief period, like 15-day periods, time periods, to make sure that everything is in sync and no temporary employee is having inadequate access or more than an access that is required. And importantly, terminated temporary employees do not have access to any of these systems. So those can be addressed by periodic or very frequent attestations.
I've received a couple of more questions, Raj.
Okay.
One is about the count of the number of employees, users that the system intended to address. That is one. The other is, do you is 8K Miles offering this solution as an on-premise solution or as a cloud service?
Okay. Let me answer the second question first, because that's what I understood. And the second question, you can repeat later, it will be great. To answer the question, yes, actually the solution can be either on-premise or it can be cloud. The cloud-based solution it offers a little bit more flexibility because you can basically control your costs in the cloud by switching off the certification when you don't want it. For example, some of the customers we have, they would want to finish the attestation in a month and a half of the quarter, and they don't want the infrastructure costs associated with the next month and a half to be charged to them, because they don't want to complete the quarter. They don't want to pay the infrastructure cost for that. And also, what this does is the cloud installation. It gives a complete independence to access the system from anywhere. It also gives the freedom to interact with the on-premise databases, LDAPs, and Active Directories through secure VPN tunnels. So the cloud solution, I would probably say, is better from a maintenance standpoint, from a connectivity standpoint, and from a cost standpoint. And the on-premise version is also there, so it can also be used. But what happens is, if you are using an on-premise system, the maintenance comes along with it. You have to have a workforce attached to the process of maintaining it for each of the quarterly campaigns. And what is your first question, Pat? Sorry, I didn't get that.
That is about the volume of users or employees that can be addressed using this IAG in general. Okay,
great, excellent question. Actually, we've been seeing that records to the tune of even 300 to 500,000, 500,000, or even 3/4 of a million records can be processed very easily. In fact, we are scaling to multiple millions also. So scaling will not be a problem because the campaign is going to happen individually to each manager's liking. So each manager will have his personal login to only see the records under him or her to attest. So that's not going to affect the performance. But to answer, yes, actually any medium-sized business or even large businesses can be accommodated with appropriate padding of the infrastructure, with good number of cores and RAM size, memory size. Yes.
Thanks, Raj. I think that's pretty much it. I think even otherwise, the audience can definitely send questions. Email ID mentioned in the chat section. So.
Yes. Yeah. Please do. If you have any questions, please use the email ID that's given on the presentation, and then we'll definitely answer questions.